I was able to make a living from writing in electronics and teaching. I could make this living by working approximately half-time. And the other half-time, you could call it puttering, or you could give it a fancy word, research. This was sort of an idyllic existence, and perhaps unfortunately, I hit pay dirt very quickly. I developed what is now known as the acoustic suspension loudspeaker. The basic principle of it is really very, very simple. It is substituting an essentially linear air spring for what were then quite nonlinear mechanical springs to serve as the restoring force of a speaker. Amplifiers in the 1950s were capable of performing at distortion levels of half of 1% or less, even at the frequency extremes and at full rated power. Loudspeakers, on the other hand, showed distortion levels in the low bass of 20 to 100 times or more that amount. The basic element of that loudspeaker that created this distortion were the mechanical suspensions of the cone, and the cone must have elastic suspensions. It can't do without them. As you go down in frequency, the excursion of the cone for a given power quadruples with each lower octave. And so when you get down into the low bass, as the cone moves forward, the suspension begins to bind, and it prevents the cone from moving the full distance in response to low frequency waveform peaks. And so I thought that I would substitute a different kind of restoring force by decimating the springy stiffness of the suspensions, allowing very large motion. But you can't just do that and not replace it. You still need that restoring force. So I used the air spring, the cushion of air in a small cabinet, to serve as this restoring force. At the time, I had two 12-inch Western Electric loudspeakers. I cut away the spider, the suspension at the small end of the cone, making it very limp. And then I cut away the entire rim suspension and replaced it with one that I made of mattress cover material, which is very suitable for the purpose because it's adequately compliant and almost impervious to air. I called this speaker system acoustic suspension because, in technical terms, the stiffness of the elastic stiffness of the air in the cabinet is called acoustic stiffness. Now, the conventional speaker relied, of course, on the mechanical springiness of the suspensions, and it required a very large cabinet behind it. The reason for this is that the amount of elastic restoring force that the speaker needed, in other words, if you take a conventional speaker and push on the cone, it'll spring back. The amount of elastic restoring force that the speaker needed has already been built into the speaker. So if you put it in a small cabinet, the cushion of air in the cabinet will increase that stiffness and you'll lose bass reproduction. So I was able to compare the performance of an acoustic suspension system with a cubic volume of less than 2 cubic feet with that of what was called an infinite baffle, the speaker mounted at the head of an enclosed stairway, and the volume of that enclosure was probably of the order of 100 cubic feet. And the performance of the acoustic suspension speaker, both in fullness of bass and especially in the low distortion bass, was, by both listening and measurements, was substantially superior to that of the conventional infinite baffle system. The results that I got from comparing these two speakers, of course, gave me the confidence to see what I could do with it. I called someone that I knew at, well, I don't think I have to mention the company, but it was, I think, either the largest speaker company or one of the largest, and told them in general terms what I had. And he said, we have a very good group of engineers here, and I think if there was something around such as you described, they would have found it. The president of another speaker company was approached by a friend of mine, and the friend told me he wasn't interested, he didn't even want to listen to it. And when I asked him why not, he said, because what you describe is impossible. That semester, one of my students, Henry Close, knew that I was working on something, and he suggested that we look into the idea of developing it, of manufacturing it commercially, that is, in a little loft that he had in Cambridge. He called it Close Industries. After these two rebuffs, I thought, well, let's try it. Henry said, that's it, and that's the way AR, Acoustic Research, was born. We first introduced the AR1 at the 1954 audio show in the fall in New York City. The first year, I happen to remember that we sold 455 speakers. When I left AR in 1967, as I recall, we had something like 32.4% market share.